right, everybody. Hey, this is really a spur-of-the-moment broadcast. Thank you for joining me on the Michael Tobin Show. Today, I have a guest. He's a American missionary on missions to, right now, mainly China, but also the world and places where many of us are actually becoming more and more fearful of even stepping foot in. North Korea, Jordan. I've been to Jordan, Syria, and Israel twice. That was in the early 1990s. And it was with church, and it was an awesome place. Not even nearly close to the way the atmosphere is right now. And everything that you can say about how it was and how it is now, basically, it is all a part of end times prophecy, God's plan, and it is also about how Satan, our enemy, is working. But through prayer, support, and participation, we can still preach the gospel. There's nowhere in the world that we cannot go and preach the gospel. And after listening to my guest, Eugene Bach, you will hopefully, prayerfully be encouraged that you can do it or be a part of it. But first, I want to play a short clip, and it is about communism, how it is affecting the United States and how it has been implemented and the results of it throughout the world. So go ahead and enjoy this clip, and then I'm going to turn this over to Eugene Bach, because he has some information, and possibly he'll give us a recap on Africa and how China is helping commerce and travel in parts of Africa that I haven't even heard about and that we're not hearing about. But also new Chinese laws with the church in China and how it is affecting them and how it affects missions. So go ahead and listen to this short clip, and stay tuned to the Michael Tobin Show.
When Benjamin Franklin exited the Constitutional Convention, he was asked by a woman, "Sir, what have you given us?" His immediate response was, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it." Yet most Americans today have been persuaded that our nation's governmental system is a democracy and not a republic. The difference between these two is essential in understanding Americanism and the American system. Before we discuss political systems, however, it's helpful to address the confusion that has been spread about the political spectrum. Many have been led to believe that the political spectrum places groups such as communists on the far left, fascists or dictators on the far right, and political moderates or centrists in the middle. However, a more accurate political spectrum will show government having zero power on the far right to having 100% power on the far left. At the extreme right, there is no government. The extreme left features total government under such labels as communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, princes, potentates, dictators, kings, any form of total government. Those who claim that Nazis and fascists are right-wing never define their terms. This amounts to spreading confusion. Toward the middle of the political spectrum can be found the type of government limited to its proper role of protecting the rights of the people. That's where the Constitution of the United States is. Those who advocate such a form of government are really constitutional moderates. So let's analyze the basic forms of government. They are monarchy or dictatorship ruled by one, oligarchy ruled by a few, democracy ruled by a majority, republic ruled by law, and anarchy, which is ruled by no one. In discussing these five, we'll see that they can be narrowed down to even fewer. Looking first at monarchy or dictatorship, this form of government doesn't really exist in the practical sense. It's always a group that puts one of its members up front. A king has his council of nobles or earls, and every dictator has his bureaucrats or commissars, the men behind the scenes. This isn't ruled by one, even though one person may be the visible leader. It's ruled by a group. So let's eliminate monarchy, dictatorship, because it never truly exists. Oligarchy, which is ruled by a group, is the most common form of government in all history, and it is the most common form of government today. Most of the nations of the world are ruled by a powerful few, and therefore oligarchy remains. At the other end, we find anarchy, which means without government. Some people have looked over history and found that many of its worst crimes were committed by governments, so they decided that having no government might be a good idea. But this is a mistake, because as the ancient Greeks stated, without law there can be no freedom. Our founding fathers agreed and held that some amount of government is a necessary force in any civilized, orderly society. In a state of anarchy, however, everyone has to guard life, liberty, and property, and the lives of family members. Everyone must be armed, and movement is severely restricted because one's property has to be protected at all times. Civilized people have always hired someone to do the guarding, a sheriff, a police force, or some branch of government. Once law enforcement was in place, the people were freer. They could leave their property, work in the fields, and so on. In short, the proper amount of government makes everyone freer. There are some who advocate anarchy, however, not because they want no government, but because they don't like what they have. They use anarchy as a tool for revolutionary change. The condition of anarchy is very much like a vacuum where something rushes in to fill it. These calculating anarchists work to break down the existing government with rioting, killing, looting, and terrorism. Tragically, the people living in such chaos often go to those best able to put an end to it and beg them to take over and restore order. And who is best able to put an end to the chaos? The very people who started it. The anarchists who created the problem then create a government run by them, an oligarchy, where they have total power. This is exactly what happened in Russia that led to Lenin taking total power, and in Germany where Hitler's brown shirts created the chaos that brought him to power. But anarchy isn't a stable form of government. It's a quick transition from something that exists to something desired by the power-hungry. It's a temporary condition, and because it isn't permanent, we eliminate it as well. The word democracy comes from two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratein, meaning to rule. Democracy, therefore, means the rule of the people, majority rule. This, of course, sounds good, but suppose the majority decides to take away one's home, or business, or children. Obviously, there has to be a limit. The flaw in democracy is that the majority isn't restrained. If more than half the people can be persuaded to want something in a democracy, they rule. What about republic? Well, that comes from the Latin. Res meaning thing, and publica meaning public. It means the public thing, the law. A true republic is one where the government is limited by law, leaving the people alone. America's founders had a clean slate to write on. They could have set up an oligarchy. In fact, there were some who wanted George Washington to be their king. But the founding fathers knew history, and they chose to give us the rule of law in a republic, not the rule of a majority in a democracy. Why? Let's demonstrate the difference in the setting of the Old West. Consider a lynch mob in a democracy. 35 horseback riders chase one lone gunman. They catch him, and they vote 35-1 to hang him. Democracy has triumphed, and there's one less gunman to contend with. Now consider the same scenario in a republic. The 35 horseback riders catch the gunman and vote 35-1 to hang him, but the sheriff arrives, and he says, "You can't kill him. He's got his right to a fair trial." So they take the gunman back to town. A jury of his peers is selected, and they hear the evidence and the defense, and they decide if he shall hang. Does the jury even decide by majority rule? No, it has to be unanimous, or he goes free. The rights of the gunman aren't subject to majority rule, but to the law. This is the essence of a republic. Many Americans would be surprised to learn that the word democracy does not appear in the Declaration of Independence or the U.S. Constitution, nor does it appear in any of the constitutions of the 50 states. The founders did everything they could to keep us from having a democracy. James Madison, rightly known as the father of the Constitution, wrote in essay number 10 of the Federalist Papers, "Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Alexander Hamilton agreed, and he stated, "We are a republican government. Real liberty is never found in despotism or in the extremes of democracy." Samuel Adams, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, stated, "Democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself." The founders had good reason to look upon democracy with contempt, because they knew that the democracies in the early Greek city-states produced some of the wildest excesses of government imaginable. In every case, they ended up with mob rule, then anarchy, and finally tyranny under an oligarchy. During that period in Greece, there was a man named Solon, who urged creation of a fixed body of law not subject to majority whims. But where the Greeks never adopted Solon's wise counsel, the Romans did. Based on what they knew of Solon's laws, they created the 12 tables of the Roman law, and in effect built a republic that limited government power and left the people alone. Since government was limited, the people were free to produce, with the understanding that they could keep the fruits of their labor. In time, Rome became wealthy and the envy of the world. In the midst of plenty, however, the Roman people forgot what freedom entailed. They forgot that the essence of freedom is the proper limitation of government. When government power grows, people freedom recedes. Once the Romans dropped their guard, power-seeking politicians began to exceed the powers granted them in the Roman constitution. Some learned that they could elect politicians who would use government power to take property from some and give it to others. Agriculture subsidies were introduced, followed by housing and welfare programs. Inevitably, taxes rose and controls over the private sector were imposed. Soon, a number of Rome's producers could no longer make ends meet, and they went on the dole. Productivity declined, shortages developed, and mobs began roaming the streets demanding bread and circuses from the government. Many were induced to trade freedom for security. Eventually, the whole system came crashing down. They went from a republic to a democracy and ended up with an oligarchy under a progression of the Caesars. Thus, democracy itself is not a stable form of government. Instead, it is the gradual transition from limited government to the unlimited rule of an oligarchy. Knowing this, we as Americans are ultimately left with only two choices. We can keep our republic, as Franklin put it, or we will inevitably end up with an oligarchy, a tyranny of the elite.
Okay, folks, that is your government lesson for today. And the point being that our present form of government is, in many Americans' opinions, the freest form of government. And it's been lasting for 200 years, but it's been whittling away. And even greater than, say, the most effective and best possible government of man available, we have the government of God, in which us as Christians, we are a part of. And Abraham searched a heavenly city and he never found it. And that is what we're looking towards also. But in our government, we are able to go to anywhere in the world as we choose to share the gospel, the good news of salvation. And with that, I want to introduce my friend Eugene Bach. I just learned of recently, and if Eugene will go ahead and just go ahead and give us a synopsis of what caught my eye first is China's new laws targeting Christians in China. Eugene, go ahead.
Hey, yeah, thanks. Well, I'm really excited to join you guys and share a little bit. I'm always happy to share about what's going on in the area between China and Jerusalem. I've been living in China for about 18 years, and we have just seen that China has come out with some new laws. their new laws. They're just kind of a little bit of lipstick and rouge on old laws, which go back to 2005, that restrict individual religious freedom for the Chinese. What they are primarily trying to do is control something that has been absolutely explosive in the last couple of decades, and that is the growth of the underground house church inside of China. They can't control it, and it scares the living daylights out of them, out of the government officials that are as a part of the Communist Party inside of China. Because in their mind, any group that becomes so large and that does not answer to the party is extremely dangerous for the stability of the rule. And for them, Christianity presents a massive threat. And that's why I believe they're coming out with these new laws. And these new laws really target people that are having unregistered meetings in homes. So they target them through fines and those kind of things, which is unique inside of China, because at least now they're putting it on paper, which is good. Before, they prosecuted a lot of the Chinese pastors that ran house churches without having really any laws to even point to. Usually when you get into communist countries, very little has to do with the rule of law that they have on paper. A lot of it has to do with the idea of crossing the Communist Party, and that in itself can be prosecutable, even when there's really no clear-cut black and white law to point to. Whenever you work in a communist country like North Korea, Russia, China, Cambodia, Laos, the law is not really used to protect the people. It's there for show. It's a dog and pony show. Has very little legislative power. Most of the power, of course, is with the very few that are in charge. And when they say somebody's going to be hunted down, persecuted, executed, that's the end of the story. People do not have any protection against the government from laws that are written. The laws that are written can be twisted, changed at any given moment. So yeah, I can share anything that you think that your audience would be interested in when it comes to the new laws of China. I would really love to do that.
Okay, I remember about 27 years ago. I'm 53 right now. So say when I was 20, when I was 25 years old, I came back to the Lord. I was saved when I was 7 years old. And I began going to church more consistently when I was 14. So from 14 to 16 years old, I'd say. So I backslid for about 10 years. And but when I was about 25 years old, I remember reading about the Voice of the Martyrs. I was fascinated. The first book I read, one of the first Christian books I actually read was Tortured for Christ. And so I learned about the Chinese, the modern day Chinese church. And what China implemented was something called the People's Church. And basically you cannot have a church or any kind of, a lot of people still don't even know that there's actually Muslims in China. And I just realized Muslims in the USSR, I had no idea. So we're still learning things. But there are really, really strict rules that they were enforcing back then. Fines, imprisonment, and even beatings for people who disobeyed the Chinese laws. So you can have a church, but it has to be registered with a People's Church, and it's much like the United States if you really think about it. There, they specifically tell you cannot say anything against government, or if there's something that you say or preach that they deem is against government, you're toast. So I from reading or listening to your podcast, Eugene, I'm learning that for a short season, I guess they've been lenient towards churches, and by lenient I mean just not going out hunting after disobedient churches, and possibly not even implementing charges against churches. But now it seems that they are implementing and enforcing the same rules that they had before 25 years ago.
Yeah, so what we have right now is, because China is a massive country, obviously much bigger geographically and population-wise than the United States. They have more children under the age of 10 than the entire population of the United States. In fact, if you took away 1 billion people from China and sent them to the moon, after missing 1 billion of their people, leaving and going to the moon, they would still have a population bigger than the United States. The population in China is quite big, and because it's so big, there has been ways that people have been able to practice their faith, even though it's against the law, without really being noticed so much. And as the number of believers has grown, there has been a fluctuation in certain places of China, and there's been crackdowns in other places of China. That's why you often get conflicting reports, because one person in Shanghai will say, you know what, I feel that the church is quite open now, there's more Christians, we have a lot more people coming to Christ, we have a lot more freedom. And then you have somebody from Hunan province that would say something like, oh, we are actually being persecuted more than ever before. And if you listen to those two voices, it sound like they are contradicting each other, but they are not. It's just that they're in different places at different times with different local government leaders that are interpreting the law as they wish. So it's not as universal as you would find in the U.S. So, for instance, the religious laws, because we do have a federal law, freedom of religion, that kind of rules over all 50 states. However, in a place like China, because law is not followed in a black and white form, we have the different implementation, the way it's implemented a little bit differently from province to province, as if it would be implemented differently from state to state. And right now what we're experiencing is an increase in persecution in some places. But there are other places that continue to have a little bit more openness than they've had in the past. And it's also important to understand that the number of Christians that are growing inside of China is so fast and so huge that it's changing society backwards and forwards. So it is changing human rights. It is changing the way that law is followed. It is changing the compassion of people for one another. And when I say that it is growing fast, it's put that in more numerical setting where you can kind of see some numbers. So though these numbers are arguable, because it is a closed country and many of the people that are Christian are not registered. Because of that, it's not easy to put a number on it. A conservative estimates are about 28,000 to 30,000 people becoming Christian in China every 24 hours, about 1 million a month. Right now, we're looking at about 150 to 170 million believers inside of China. There would be a lot of people that would challenge those numbers, but I have been working with some of the top underground house church leaders. In fact, I've sat down with them and written their stories that we've put and published here in the U.S. From the most well-recognized, internationally recognized top pastors. Two of them who I've written their biographies for. One of them is a guy by the name of Pastor Zhang Liang. His church is a little small church in China of about 10 million believers. My wife is from Sweden. That's more members in his church than her entire country. Another pastor by the name of Pastor Shen, who's the pastor of the China Gospel Fellowship, also by Wikipedia numbers is about 10 million believers. So both of these churches are just two house church networks inside of China that make up the massive number of new believers inside of China today. And because of that, there are certain government officials in certain areas of China that are getting nervous, and so they do a crackdown. What makes it different now is that President Xi, who is thought to be one of the most absolute put up in the same hall to Mao Zedong, has been very strong at trying to consolidate more power than all the Chinese presidents prior to him, except for Mao Zedong. So there was a decentralization that's been taking place over the last couple decades. That is now regressing and going in the opposite direction with President Xi. President Xi is consolidating his power, and in that consolidation process has been implementing these new laws, which are due to be released February 1st of 2018, that would specifically target and crack down on the underground house church growth.
So President Xi, though he has had a couple of nice amicable meetings with President Donald Trump, and from what you said in a previous podcast, I remember the idea of having a back door to our president as a missionary when we're in another country, that we have resources that we can get a call for help, and with confidence that our current president will actually do something for an American in another country. In that respect, I like the way you presented it, that we now have a back door as missionaries to the White House. But I really like the friendliness and the friendly meetings that President Xi and President Trump had together. But at the same time, now Mao Zedong, I never say his name right. I call him Mousy. I call him Mousy. But he was the last bad guy of China from the 1970s. And before him, I'm not too sure of all the names, but Sun Yat-sen, I believe, if my social studies in 7th grade is correct, Sun Yat-sen may have been the second communist or the first communist ruler of China when they cracked down 70 years ago. So we got to remember, their communism in China has only lasted 70 or so years. But it sounds like President Xi is going back to being like Mao Zedong.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. We are, and I really do want to communicate this. We are not asking or advocating for people to contact congressmen or put pressure on government or anything of that nature. And this is why. We are just sharing the information for people to pray. And I know that might sound a bit abstract, but this is the reason why. The growth of the church inside of China, this is the largest revival in the world right now, by far. And it's also had extreme longevity. Every time the government takes measures to crack down on the church actually does the exact opposite of their goal. So the goal of the Communist Party in their crackdown is to control the growth of the church and to restrict the leaders from being able to reach the people that have not heard the gospel. And their hopes is to strangle it, choke it of life, and kill it. And every single example of them attempting to do that, the church has done the exact opposite of what the government intended to do.
And that's happening. That's happening in North Korea.
Yeah, something about persecution fuels the flame of revival. Now, it's nothing we pray for. We actually pray for relief from it. However, every time we see that these measures are taken, I cannot help but to draw a clear line to spikes in growth. Every time we see an increase in persecution, we see the church grow stronger, deeper, and bigger. Now, I would actually say that it would be probably a little bit better if the government would relax their restrictions on the church and let it go for a couple generations. Maybe then they will become a lot more relaxed. Maybe they would become a lot more infighting. Maybe then the church growth would stop if they were being blessed and had more freedom. I don't know. All I know is that every time we get an increase in persecution in China, we see a direct correlation with more growth. And right now, this train in China for the Christian church long, and it shows no signs of slowing down. And that makes us extremely excited. And this is why. It's because every single time I see Christian believers go into a new country and are able to see transformation of lives on an individual basis, that usually has a social influence. And that social influence has led to the world's most free nation. Not as a result of government structure, but as a direct result of Christian influence. Meaning that whenever we see, for instance, if I look at the history of revival, going from the Mount of Olives and following it westward, everywhere that Christian revival broke out, it broke out in spite of persecution, and some might even argue because of. And even though nations were not conquered by armies, nations like the Roman Empire, nations like the very first Christian country, Armenia, whenever we look at the history of Turkey, when we look at the history of Georgia, the country, these nations all came to Christ. And actually, I could go on and on and on throughout history. They all turned to Christ and became Christian countries, not because they were conquered by an army or came somehow naturally, had a natural epiphany and were able to implement a government structure, but it was because dedicated Christians, men and women of Christ, gave their lives and in what seemed to be a fool's errand, ended up changing nations. Where nations, by the way, this is the direct difference between Islam and Christianity. Islam conquers nations by the sword. They force people to remain in their religion through the threat of death and fear. Whereas Christianity brings in hope, oftentimes as in direct conflict with the standing government. And what ends up taking place is nations are changed as a result. So I feel that if we are going to see a change in North Korea, if we are going to see a change in Afghanistan, if we are going to see a change in Iran, my advice would not be to try to implement a form of government that secularly we would feel this would be the best for you, but instead bring in messengers of the gospel of Jesus Christ, individually change the hearts of men and women on the ground. We see it, I believe. I did 2 tours in the Persian Gulf. I was in the U.S. Marine Corps. I feel that if I really want to see a difference, and of course there's a need for military, there's a need for great government. I'm not arguing against that. The only thing that I'm saying is that as a church, what is our responsibility? What is our responsibility as Christians? And I would say our responsibility is, instead of sending soldiers, what if we send from our church missionary? Instead of sending bombs, what if our church sends Bible? I think that we can see explosive change from the inside out instead of forcing it from the outside in. But I have to warn you and your listeners that this kind of activity is one that comes at great sacrifice. And the initial headlines look like complete loss. Every single time I go through these stories in history where nations have changed, including the very story of our Messiah, him hanging on a cross at the hands of the occupier Romans, looked like nothing but a complete and absolute failure by a guy who should have just stuck with the family construction business. But with only a handful of men, he absolutely changed the world to the point that today, in the year 2017, in the year of our Lord Jesus Christ. So he changed time. Even our time revolves around him. So even though, I want people to be very much aware of what's going on with the government inside of China and with these new laws, so that people can be aware of how to pray for the Chinese, I don't want to give the impression that, we want to raise up some sort of government structure inside of China and overthrow. I'm sure there's a lot of people that have great ideas and more power to them. But for us, for me, when I'm speaking mainly of our Christian vision and mission inside of China. If that makes sense. I don't know if that comes across or if I've been able to communicate it. But that is the vision that we have, is that just continue reaching people for Christ, come hell or high water.
Yeah, it does make sense. It makes a lot of sense. It is being a missionary isn't just something that you can see as part of a school curriculum or something and sit and spin the globe and put your finger on it and say, where my finger stops, that's where I'm going. It's not like that. You have to pray on where to go, just like King David prayed. He said, should I go up against the enemies? And God said, yes, go around the mulberry bush. God told him exactly what to do and when. And that kind of prayer worked for David, but one of the times God told him no. So instead of arguing with God, David just didn't attack at the time. We do the same thing with missions, especially when we're going to Afghanistan, Iraq, North Korea, Cuba, and even China. Now, China's a good place to go on a tour, but you have to mind your P's and Q's and don't do or say anything unless God is actually telling you something. But don't. So you just have to go in prayer. It's not something that you could just haphazardly go and do.
And we are absolutely seeing a time frame. Now, I don't want to in any way sound like an expert because I'm not, but I just as a guy looking at the Bible from a very elementary point of view, for whatever reason, when we follow the first century church in the book of Acts, one of the things that I have found fascinating and have actually dedicated the last few years of my life to, traveling around the world following, is that when we start on Acts 1:8 at the Great Commission, when Christ is on the Mount of Olives, and I've stood there on the Mount of Olives and looked at the Eastern Gate, and when you are looking at the Eastern Gate as he would have been a Sabbath day's walk away from Jerusalem, which would have been on the western side of the Mount of Olives, you are facing the Eastern Gate, and facing the Eastern Gate you're looking westward. So when he tells his disciples to take the gospel to the ends of the world, oftentimes I think that we think of, or at least at that time they may have even thought that there was an end to the world, that there was a square box that you fall off the end of the world somewhere. I mean, I think that's why maybe Paul put so much emphasis on Spain, because Spain was thought of as being the end of the world at that time. But clearly, after Acts chapter 2, for whatever reason, the author of Acts, Luke, writes about Peter and how Peter goes to Jerusalem with the disciples. That's a westward movement. From there, he follows him to Joppa, through the Joppa gate, into Joppa, where he has a vision of Cornelius. That's a westward movement. That's the very western coast of Israel. And then for whatever reason, there's a transition that takes place from Peter to Paul. And Paul then goes from Jerusalem to Judea to Asia Minor, and he tries, and we look at Acts chapter 16, he tries to go east to Asia, but the Bible tells us he's stopped by the Holy Spirit. He tries to go north to Bithynia, but he's stopped by the Spirit of Jesus. And then we see that he has a vision of a man from Europe, Macedonia, and that leads him westward. And we see that in that order, nations are changed, transformed. We know that missionaries also went eastward. We know that Thomas went to Iran and then eventually all the way to India. I've been to the tomb of Thomas in India. But for whatever reason, it didn't stick. Where it did stick was Asia Minor, Africa, and Europe. Africa had amazing revivals that we don't hear about anymore because Islam erased their history. But actually, these were the very foundations of today's church. The theology that came out of Africa, especially the Alexandrian schools in Egypt, were shaping what we believe today. Even if we look at what was written with the Nicene Creed, it came from the theology of Africa. The word Trinity, the concept of Trinity, came from Tutilium, which is Northern Africa. So Africa, Europe, completely transformed. It continues its westward march to America. America had two great awakenings, at least two. Two great awakenings, big revivals that took place. Central and South America as well. That march continued westward, and we believe that today China is having the world's largest revival. The world's largest church, that title belongs to South Korea. have Asia being transformed right now during our lifetime. The news, by the way, is missing this. This is one of the largest transformations of our generation, and yet we don't really even talk about it on the news. However, we believe that westward march continues to the ends of the world. And if you're on a circle or a circular track and you run a race, usually the end is right where you began. So right now, that's why the Chinese have this vision that they call Back to Jerusalem. That area between China and Jerusalem is the last frontier of mission. This is also the poorest area in the world. This is the most violent area in the world. This is the most volatile area in the world. And this is, I believe, our call today to take the gospel into these areas, and that we will see a revival take place in those regions as well until every ear has heard, right? And then the end will come. That's what we're told about the end, that every nation would be able to hear the good news of Jesus Christ. And that hasn't happened yet. 2,000 years later, we have been sneaking lazy and fearful and egotistical, and we haven't completed the Great Commission. And that's what's exciting about what's taking place inside of China, is that a new generation of the world's most populated country is now joining the ranks, not taking over, not taking our place, but joining the ranks, jumping down into the foxhole, jumping down into the trenches, ready to fight together with us. And sorry if I talked a little bit too long. But I just wanted to share, that's kind of the meat and potatoes of the vision of the Chinese.
No, not.
Everything together with it.
Yeah, no need to apologize. I love listening to what people have to say, and I can't stand watching interviews or listening to interviews where the host is always interrupting. And I actually learned a good lesson on that by listening to this AM radio show that comes on late at night. It's called Coast to Coast, and one of the things I learned from that, other than their content, is that every one of their hosts, they've got at least 3 or 4 of them, they never interrupt one of their guests. I'm like, wow, what a concept. They don't interrupt their guests, and they learn something. And it's not just for their listeners. Those hosts are actually learning something, so they don't have an agenda. They just want the people to hear what their guest has to say. So yeah, I've been thinking about that. Like each time I listen to one of your podcasts, I'm like, man, this guy. You know who you remind me of is, I don't know if you've heard of him, but you heard of Bob and Jerry Boyd from Issues of Education?
I'm sorry, actually, I haven't.
Okay, they started, I guess, in the mid 1980s on radio, and I credit their show among the few shows that opened my eyes to what is going on in the world and the United States. And so I want to encourage our listeners. I put the link to your podcasts on the information on this. But I wanted to ask you, do you know Michael Basham?
I don't.
Okay. He knows Brother Yun.
From most, I'm kind of removed from a lot of communities, mainly because I spend most of my time, I travel about 300 days a year, more than 300 days a year, and I spend most of my time in Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. So I don't, and I work primarily with Chinese.
Okay.
So the people that I'm connecting with in the different nations are very rarely Westerners, but more likely than not Chinese.
Okay, my friend.
So my circle is limited to that.
Okay, my friend Michael Basham, he has a podcast called Spirit Wars, and he actually knows Brother Yun, and he saw one of my posts last week, and he asked me to ask Brother Yun if he can give him a call, but I was already gone when I saw the message. So, but my friend would like to interview Brother Yun in Chinese because he speaks Chinese also. So anyhow, I was just wondering if there's a way that my friend could get a hold of Brother Yun.
Usually when he's traveling so we're traveling together right now. What we are doing is going from church to church. We have partnership churches throughout the U.S. That really want to be involved in what is happening with these so as we're traveling around, Brother Yun doesn't carry a phone with him, and he will do TV interviews, but he usually doesn't do any sort of audio interview. The reason why is for two reasons. One is most interviews are done in English, and he doesn't like to have a translator when he's doing an interview for that delay on audio. And the other, if it's for Chinese, he has a very strong, what we call Hunan accent, and most Chinese don't understand exactly what he's saying all the time.
Oh, that would be like me. That would be like me interviewing somebody from the Cajun area of Alabama or something.
Yes.
I wouldn't be.
So
wouldn't be
he
able to
doesn't
understand.
feel comfortable usually doing audio. But anyway, we're traveling around sharing with people, and the reason why we're sharing in the U.S. is not because we have a vision for the U.S., but we have a lot of people in the U.S. that want to partner together with us because they have seen a huge decline in the way that the American church has gone on the offensive. For the most part, for the last couple generations, we have been on the defense when it comes to Christian operations abroad. And we've also been pretty egocentric in the way that this is a study that's been done a couple of years ago, so it's not that recent. But basically, if you look at the amount that's given in the church for areas that are unreached, it's pretty pitiful. If you think about the area between China and Jerusalem, 2/3 of the world's population live there. So 2 out of every 3 people that are born in the world today are born between China and Jerusalem. Then you have 9/10 of the world's unreached. So 9 out of every 10 people in the world today that have never heard the gospel, even one time, live between China and Jerusalem. Now think about the significance of where the biggest body of people that have never heard the gospel lives. If you look at the amount of money that's given to missions, not given to the church, this is according to the World Evangelistic Research Team, and if you look at the amount of money that's given to missions in the United States, for every $100 that's given, only 2 pennies makes it to the unreached people group from that $100. The rest of it goes to domestic programs, reaching other Christians, or trying to do programs that reach other Christians, or to do outreach into nations that already have a Christian majority. Only 2 pennies makes it to the countries that are unreached. Only 1 penny out of that 2 makes it to the area between China and Jerusalem. So it should not be surprising at all that that is the source of our greatest problem as a nation. Because I have to tell you, if I live in one of these unreached countries, suffering at the hands of tyranny, because our nation has yet to fall on its knees before God, and I knew that there was a nation that had all the gospel teachings available to men at their fingertips, and they haven't been sharing it with me, I'd be pretty ticked off too. So I think that's one of the things from the Back to Jerusalem vision. Are you still there?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, good. I don't know if you can hear the background noise or not, but I've actually been doing the interview while I'm here at an airport. I'm at the LAX getting ready to fly to our next meeting, and I'm about to check in. I'm getting ready to run in and check in and catch my flight. But I'm so happy that I was able to just chat with you for a little bit and share about Back to Jerusalem.
All right, and I'm going to have all the links on there for my listeners to go ahead and go to Back to Jerusalem and check out that children's book that has been flying off the shelves, literally, children's book. And, God, that
has been really exciting for us. That, by the way, that book is the only book that we know of, and we work with some pretty large publishers around the world, but most publishers won't touch that book. And the reason why is because it has miracles in it, and that is not marketable at certain Christian bookstores. So we have actually done the publishing, and there's been a hunger for it. And this is the reason why. These books tell real stories from today about missionaries that are serving in these closed nations, especially like Chinese missionaries that are serving in areas like Tibet, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia. We have a series of 10 books for the very first installment, and each book talks about these amazing miracles that are taking place with missionaries. And can you imagine? I mean, especially now here in the U.S., you've seen all the problem with Hollywood, and the big heroes of Hollywood are now being under all these investigations for sexual harassment and some really disgusting things. You've seen our sports stars that are supposed to be role models for our children, disrespecting and even a bit militant towards the country that they actually live in, that gives them the freedom to do so. Can you imagine that instead of looking to Hollywood and to sports characters as the main role models for our children, if we would look to missionaries, people that actually sacrifice something, and to be able to give the light of the world to people that don't have access to it. That's what these stories do. They talk about real modern day heroes and what they're doing. And these books are different in the way that they also expose children to the unreached mission field with the hopes that possibly we can plant the seed into the next generation to take the gospel into these unreached areas should our generation fail to do so. The other thing is, which I think is really cool, is you get cultural exposure as well as language exposure. A child that reads these books only one time will know a few words of Chinese without even knowing. We expose children to the Chinese language, where they learn the world's fastest growing language for second language speakers. They can actually learn today's commerce language of Mandarin Chinese only by reading the book a time or two. So yeah, we've been making this book available at the meetings, and they have not lasted more than 5 minutes, and at the book tables, and we're out. And so we have long lines of very frustrated people that wanted to get the book and just didn't. We weren't able to provide one to everyone at the meeting. So we greatly underestimated the number of books that we would sell on this tour. But that's an exciting thing. We feel that this is possibly a market that hasn't been really tapped into for Christian parents that want to share something with their kids that they feel could benefit them.
Yeah, and children's books are being quite the rage now with the secular people who you don't want writing children's books, and people who it's welcome to write children's books. But I recommend it, and prayers are going out for your safety, Eugene, your whole ministry's safety, and everybody involved, and victory, and beauty for ashes, and success in doing what Jesus said, going out to the whole world, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. That's a whole 40-minute sermon right there in that prayer. But thanks for joining. Thanks for joining me, Eugene.
Thank you so much, brother. Appreciate it.
All right. God bless you.
Anytime. All right. Bless you, man. Bye.
All right. Well, that was a pretty neat interview, folks. If I could do it, you could do it. Get yourself a Spreaker or something. Be like the Bible. Don't be silent. Every time before I get on the air, I sweat. My palms sweat. I'm nervous, and I'm thinking I can't stand this, but I am driven to do it. So I have the luxury of just clicking the button and going live, and there's no turning back. So I hope you enjoyed the show. I got a couple links on there, and stay tuned for my blog that I'm going to come out with on this podcast next. And as always, stay tuned for whatever's next on the Michael Tobin Show. You never know. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.